Life has a funny way of keeping secrets. Sometimes the smallest actions, the ones we don't even think twice about, end up shaping our destiny in ways we never imagined. And tonight, in the dimly lit halls of a city hospital, a struggling woman was about to make a decision that would change her life forever, though she had no idea yet. Nadia, a single mother with nothing but calloused hands and a heart too big for this cruel world, was mopping the cold, sterile floor when the emergency room doors burst open. Chaos, panic, nurses rushing, voices sharp with urgency. On the stretcher, a man who had it all: wealth, power, the kind of life Nadia couldn't even dream of. His face, pale as the moonlight filtering through the windows, was the kind you'd see in magazines, the kind that made headlines for billion-dollar deals and luxury yachts. But right now, he wasn't making any deals. He was making a deal with death. "No pulse!" a nurse shouted. "We need a transfusion, now!" Doctors scrambled, but there was a problem. His blood type was rare, and there was none left in the hospital supply. Seconds ticked away like a cruel countdown, and that's when it happened. That's when Nadia did something that no one expected, the kind of thing that changes the course of fate. "Take mine," she said, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was offering. The doctors hesitated. Who was this woman? Just a janitor? Just another nobody? But Nadia didn't wait for their approval. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing the thin veins of a woman who had given more than she had ever received. And just like that, without knowing the name of the man she was saving, without expecting a single thing in return, she gave him life, a secret sacrifice, a moment of pure selflessness. And then she disappeared back into the shadows, unnoticed, unthanked, unaware that fate wasn't done with her just yet. Oh no, fate had big plans for Nadia. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear worn-out shoes, mop floors for minimum wage, and go home to a dinner of cheap canned soup, stretching every last penny. That was Nadia. And after that fateful night, after saving the life of a billionaire who didn't even know her name, she went right back to the life she knew: struggle, sacrifice, and survival. No one clapped for her. No cameras flashed. No reward showed up at her doorstep. Just another day, another bill to pay, another shift where her body ached, but quitting wasn't an option. Because in her tiny one-bedroom apartment, a pair of innocent brown eyes looked up at her every night, waiting for bedtime stories, waiting for hope. Her son, Adam, her reason for everything. But hope? Hope was expensive. Rent was overdue. The landlord had that look in his eyes, the one that said eviction was coming. The grocery list was a cruel joke. Half the things on it she couldn't afford. And Adam? He needed new shoes, but new wasn't in Nadia's vocabulary. Second hand, maybe. Third hand, definitely. But new? That was for other people, rich people, the kind of people who didn't have to choose between electricity and food. Yet, through it all, Nadia never complained. She never regretted giving her blood to that man in the hospital, never wondered if he would ever find out who saved him. Because that wasn't why she did it. She did it because, well, because she knew what it felt like to be helpless, to be at the mercy of the world, to have nothing and still give everything. "Rent's due, Nadia." The landlord's voice was sharp, impatient. "I just need a little more time," she pleaded, her hands gripping the doorknob. But he was already shaking his head. No mercy, no kindness, just business. Because in this world, kindness didn't pay the bills. So she worked harder, longer, took on extra shifts, cleaned more hospital rooms, swallowed her exhaustion like a bitter pill. But no matter how much she pushed, it was never enough. The world was a treadmill, and she was running barefoot, always falling behind. Meanwhile, across the city, in a world of glass towers and endless wealth, Daniel Sterling, the man she saved, was recovering. He had no idea that somewhere in the same city, the woman who gave him life was struggling to afford a loaf of bread. He had everything, she had nothing. And fate? Oh, fate was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to bring them back together. One night, exhausted and defeated, Nadia sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Adam was asleep, curled up in a blanket too thin for the cold. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the faint pulse of the blood she had given away so easily. Would she do it again? If she could go back to that night, knowing that her kindness wouldn't change her circumstances, would she still roll up her sleeve and offer everything she had? Yes, 1,000 times yes, because that's who she was, even if the world never repaid her. But here's the thing about fate. It doesn't forget. It might take its time, it might let the years pass, but when it finally decides to act, it makes sure the whole world watches. And soon, Nadia's life was about to change in a way she never saw coming. Years passed. Seasons changed. The world kept spinning. And Nadia? She kept surviving, day after day, paycheck to paycheck, doing whatever it took to keep a roof over her son's head. Life wasn't fair, but she had stopped expecting it to be. That's just how things were, or so she thought. But across the city, in a world of luxury cars, designer suits, and billion-dollar deals, a man named Daniel Sterling was still haunted by a question he couldn't answer. Who saved me? Doctors told him the truth. He had almost died. A blood transfusion saved his life, but the donor? A mystery. No records, no name. Just a silent act of kindness that had brought him back from the edge of death. And for years, that thought ate away at him. Daniel wasn't used to owing people. He was the one who paid the bills, who signed the checks, who made things happen. And yet, someone out there had given him the greatest gift of all and disappeared like a ghost. So he did what any billionaire with unlimited resources would do. He started a search, a nationwide campaign, news articles, social media posts, looking for the stranger who saved my life. Thousands of people came forward, some looking for money, some spinning lies, but none of them were the one he was looking for. The trail ran cold, and just when Daniel was about to give up, when he started to accept that he might never find the person who saved him, fate decided it was time. Nadia didn't know any of this. She didn't watch the news. She didn't have time for social media. Her life was a cycle of exhaustion and survival, and the idea that some billionaire was looking for her, not even a thought in her mind. But fate doesn't need permission to work its magic. One day, desperate for a better job, Nadia found herself sitting in a sleek, high-rise office, filling out a job application for Sterling Enterprises, the company owned by none other than Daniel Sterling himself. She wasn't aiming high, just a receptionist job, maybe an assistant position, anything stable to take care of Adam. And that's when the first thread of destiny started pulling. At that exact moment, Daniel was in the same building. He had no idea that the person he was searching for was sitting just a few floors below him, nervously clutching a pen, hoping for a chance to earn a living. And Nadia? She had no idea that she was about to step right back into the life of the man she had once saved. She sat across from a hiring manager, answering questions, trying to sound confident, even though she felt like an imposter in this world of polished floors and expensive suits. And then, something small, a paper cut, just a tiny nick on her finger from the application form. She barely noticed it, but the company had a strict health and safety policy. "Let's just clean that up," the assistant said, leading her to the in-house clinic for a routine check. And that's when the universe stepped in, a quick first aid procedure, a standard company wellness check. Nothing unusual until a nurse looked at the screen, then at Nadia, then back at the screen. Wait, This can't be right, she muttered. Because Nadia's blood type? It was rare, the same rare type that had saved Daniel's life years ago. The system cross-checked medical records, and within minutes, the truth was out. The mystery donor wasn't a ghost. She wasn't some long-lost savior. She was right here, in the building, applying for a job. Daniel was in the middle of a meeting when the news hit him like a truck. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. The person he had been searching for wasn't across the country. She was in his building right now. He didn't wait for explanations. He didn't care about protocol. He just moved, power walked through the halls, past stunned employees, straight to where Nadia was, this woman who had saved his life without expecting a single thing in return. And when he finally stood in front of her, when their eyes met for the first time, it was like time itself held its breath. Nadia blinked, confused, not understanding why this powerful man, this billionaire, was looking at her like he had just found a missing piece of himself. And Daniel? He didn't know what to say. Because how do you thank someone who saved your life and never asked for anything in return? His voice, usually so controlled, shook when he finally spoke. It was you. Nadia frowned, unsure. Excuse me? Daniel took a step closer. You're the reason I'm alive. It clicked. The hospital that night, the blood transfusion, the billionaire she saved all those years ago, was standing right in front of her. And in that moment, everything changed. Because this time, she wasn't going to walk away unnoticed.
Silence, heavy, unspoken words filling the space between them. Nadia standing in the middle of a corporate office, her thrift store blouse suddenly feeling too small under the weight of Daniel Sterling's gaze. He looked at her like she was something rare, something irreplaceable. And for the first time in years, someone finally saw her. Not just as a struggling single mother, not as a nameless worker cleaning floors, but as the woman who had once given without asking.
Nadia swallowed hard. She started, but Daniel stepped forward, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe it. You saved my life. His voice was hoarse, raw with something she couldn't name. Gratitude? Shock? Fate finally catching up? She forced a small, nervous laugh. I just donated blood. She tried to brush it off, tried to pretend it wasn't a big deal. But to Daniel, it was everything.
Because here was a man who had spent years chasing power, success, money, things that could be measured, counted, controlled. But here stood a woman who had given him something he could never put a price on, and that shook him to his core.
For years, he had felt this unspoken debt, an invisible thread connecting him to someone he couldn't find. But now, she was right here, a woman who was barely getting by, a woman who had nothing, because life had never rewarded her kindness, and that didn't sit right with him, not one bit. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to ignore fate. He wasn't the type to let things slide. And if the universe had finally brought them together, then it was time to settle the score. Get me my legal team? Now Dot. Because if she had given him life, then it was only fair that he gave her one worth living. The next morning, Nadia was back in her tiny apartment, back to the life she knew. Rent overdue. Her son, Adam, tugging on her sleeve, asking if they could have real breakfast instead of just toast again. And just as she was about to figure out how to stretch another dollar, her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. But something told her this wasn't just another bill collector. Ms. Nadia, this is Daniel Sterling's office. Mr. Sterling would like to meet with you. Immediately. Hours later, Nadia stepped into a world that felt like another planet. Polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a city she never thought she'd see from this high up. Everything screamed wealth, and yet the man standing in front of her, the one who had it all. He looked at her as if she was the most important thing in the room. Daniel didn't waste time. You saved my life, and I know you didn't do it for a reward, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stand by and do nothing. She blinked, confused. I don't understand.
Daniel exhaled, then dropped the first bombshell. Your rent is paid. Forever.
Nadia's heart stopped. What?
And not just rent. You own your apartment now?
Her breath hitched. That alone was more than she could ever dream of. But Daniel? He wasn't done. I've set up a trust fund for your son. He'll have the best education, any school he wants. And you? He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. You'll never have to struggle again.
Her legs felt weak. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Was this a dream? Some cruel joke?
Why? The question barely escaped her lips.
Daniel's voice softened. Because you gave me a second chance at life, and I'm giving you one too.
Tears welled up in her eyes, not because of the money, not because of the house or the job, but because, for the first time in forever, someone cared. Someone saw her. Someone said, "You matter." She could have refused, could have let pride get in the way. But this wasn't just about her. This was about Adam, about a future where she didn't have to choose between food and bills, a future where her son could dream bigger than she ever could. So, for the first time in her life, Nadia said yes. Yes to the help. Yes to a better life. Yes to believing that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe gets it right.
Months later, Nadia stood in the doorway of her new home, watching Adam play in their backyard. A backyard, something she never thought they'd have. She looked down at the job offer in her hands, an executive assistant role at Sterling Enterprises, a job that actually paid what she deserved.
And just as she was about to step inside, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel.
Dinner tonight?
She smiled, because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a debt repaid. Maybe it was the start of something more. Because fate doesn't just bring people together. Sometimes it gives them a second chance at everything. Nadia sat on the balcony of her new home, a cup of tea warming her hands. The scent of jasmine drifted in the evening breeze, mixing with the distant laughter of her son, Adam, playing in the backyard. A backyard, something she never imagined they would have. Something that, just months ago, had seemed like a fantasy. Too distant, too impossible.
But now it was real.
She glanced down at her phone. A message from Daniel. Daniel, big day tomorrow. Hope you're ready, boss. Boss. The word still felt strange, unreal. But after everything, after years of struggle, after proving herself, she wasn't just an employee at Sterling Enterprises anymore. She was now the head of corporate philanthropy, a position Daniel created just for her. Because if anyone knew how to change lives, it was Nadia. From the exhausted woman scrubbing hospital floors, to the confident leader signing off on projects to help struggling families, from a mother who had to fight for every scrap, to a woman who could finally give back. Across the city, Daniel checked his watch, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. He wasn't used to this, waiting, feeling impatient, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just meeting a woman who once saved his life. He was meeting the woman who had changed it.
And then she walked in.
No thrift store clothes, no exhaustion dragging her down, just a woman who had faced the storm and won. And as Daniel stood, his lips curling into a smile, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just dinner. This was the start of something more. She sat across from him, mirroring his smile. "So," she teased, raising an eyebrow, "are you always this dramatic when you ask someone to dinner?" Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Only when it's someone who changed my life. And so, the woman who once gave everything without expecting a thing finally received what she deserved, not just a reward, not just security, but a future filled with hope, purpose, and maybe even love.
Because fate doesn't make mistakes, and when it decides to bring two souls together, there's always a reason.
Fade to black.